Hello Williams class, for your science lesson today, the learning objective is, can I consider some of the natural changes that could happen to an environment and what some living things can do to survive such changes? By the end of this lesson, you will think about changes, you will design a living thing that could survive a huge range of changes, and you will also begin to think about changes, big changes, such as climate change. So let's talk a little bit about environments. Now, environments change. Sometimes they change naturally, and sometimes humans change them. Most natural changes happen regularly and they do not pose a danger to the living things. So that means that some changes that do happen naturally, they happen all the time and they're not dangerous to living things. Living things have special adaptations that allow them to survive the changes. So they have features about themselves that help them to survive when something changes. They have adaptations. When you have an adaptation, that means that you're able to change something about yourself. You're able to adapt in order to survive. Think about what some living things have to do to cope with weather. What do they have to do to cope with weather? Have a little think. And I would also like for you to think of some changes to an environment that happen naturally. So did you mention these environmental changes below? Seasons. You have autumn, summer, spring, winter. All of these seasons are seasons that change. Winter's very, very different to summer. So that's a change in the environment. You have tides. Tides can change. If you live by the water, if you ever are nearby the water, you'll notice that the tide, the body of water comes in to the shore and it also goes out. So that is an environmental change. Volcanoes erupting, that is an environmental change, because to go from a volcano being dormant and not having erupted, the landscape, the environment around that volcano looks very, very different before a volcanic eruption and after a volcanic eruption. Night and day. Night and day is an environmental change because night and day could not be more different to each other. Extreme weather. So you have really, really hot weather, but then you can have really, really cold weather as well, where it begins to snow, for example. So they are also environmental changes. How do some living things adapt to natural changes in their environment? What I would like for you to do is have a go at answering this quiz. You're going to choose the correct answer in each scenario that follows. So I'm going to describe something and you're going to choose what you think is the correct answer. Are you ready? Pencil and paper at the ready, boys and girls, or a whiteboard if you'd like. So the first question is, during winter, much of Canada is covered in snow. To hide from predators, a snowshoe hare will they hibernate? Or will they change from having brown fur to white fur? Write your answer now. Next question. At night, a tulip flower will close up to stop the dew from getting the pollen wet or to protect it from frost? Write your answer now. And by the way, just as a little fun fact for you, scientists are not really sure why, but both of these theories are considered a possibility. Next question. Dormice survive the cold winter by hibernating for 6 months or by growing thicker fur? Next question. To cope with less available food during winter, a squirrel will fatten up over summer so it doesn't need to eat, or spend the summer and autumn storing food for the winter months. Here are your answers. So for the question about the snowshoe hare, question or answer 2 was the correct one. For the question about the tulip, both 1 and 2 would have been correct, because as we said before, scientists aren't really sure why, but both of those theories are considered a possibility. Both of those things could happen and do happen. The question about the dormouse, if you selected option number 1, you are absolutely correct. And lastly, the question about the squirrel, if you selected option number 2, then you were correct. Very well done. Now your tasks for your science lesson, boys and girls. Task number 1. Design a living thing, plant or animal, that could survive all the natural environment changes listed in the introduction. Task number 2. Label the parts that will help them to survive. For example, pockets to store food when their food source is scarce. Scarce means when you don't have much of the food, it's quite rare and almost finished as well. Task number 3. Research the phrase climate change. What does it mean? Who or what will it affect? You can ask a grown-up at home, read some information books, you can search on the internet to find out about it. When we think about task 1, you're designing a living thing that could survive all the natural environment changes listed in the introduction. So let's go back and have a look at what those changes are. So if I was to write task 1, so let's make note of all the different changes that you need to bear in mind, you need to think about before designing your living thing. You have seasons. So the examples of the seasons are autumn, winter, summer, and spring. So think about what living thing could survive autumn, winter, summer, and spring. Think about what makes those weathers quite hard to deal with. In the winter time, for example, it can get so cold, it starts to snow. So what would your living thing need to have in order to survive the cold? And then on the other side of the coin, you have summer, where it becomes unbearably hot, maybe. So you have to design a living thing that could then tolerate the heat of the summer. So that's what I want you to think about. Really break down your ideas when you think about the first task. Before you start to design your living thing, really remember what your living thing has to be able to survive. And if you're thinking that there's no living thing that could survive every single one, every single change, that is the point of this activity. You're going to design your very own living thing. It could be a plant, it could be an animal. I don't think it would be one that exists, because I don't think there's a living thing that survives every single condition or change in the environment. So you really have to put your thinking caps on and think about an imaginary living thing that you could create that would be able to survive all these different changes and all these different environmental factors. And the key word to remember here is adaptations. What you're then designing on these living things are adaptations, ways in which they change in order to then survive the heat, survive the cold, survive the rain, survive really dry weather. Have a good think, plan your work before you design your living thing. Make sure when you're designing your living thing as well to use pencil, so you can rub it out if you find that you've made a mistake or if it's coming out in a way that you don't want it to. Make sure that you bring it to life using color, and also then for task number 2, label the parts of your living thing. So then it's super, super clear what adaptations are on that living thing for it to then survive. You could draw the most beautiful, detailed picture, but if you haven't labeled it, then it might be quite tricky to identify what they have that helps them to survive. So make sure, as soon as you've designed your living thing, you've added color to it, you're happy with the way it looks, label it. Label the different parts that help them to survive. Is it something to do with their eyes? Is it something to do with their fur? If it's a plant, is it something to do with a certain type of feed that they are given? Really reflect and make sure to label your living thing, plant or animal. Make sure that you are using a ruler to label your design, just to make it as neat as possible. And for task number 3, really try and use all the resources, as many as you can, that are around you. Adults, siblings, Google, books that you might have on climate change and see what you can find out, because I think you'll find that it will help you for your next lesson in science. That is all from me for your science lesson today, Williams class. Enjoy your designing. I'm really excited to see what sorts of creations you come up with, and I'll see you in your next science lesson.